explanation. Welcome back to Global Current Lens, where headlines are decoded, strategies are exposed, and the truth about global events comes into focus. A warning has been delivered, sharp, unmistakable, and unsettling. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, explanation, has issued a direct threat over Europe's accelerating militarization. His message wasn't couched in diplomatic language. Explanation, it wasn't hidden between the lines of a policy document. It was delivered with explosive clarity. Europe is marching down a dangerous path, pressured, and Russia is ready to respond. Is this just rhetoric meant to remind Europe of its vulnerability, or does it mark the beginning of a new and more perilous chapter in global security? Tonight, we peel back the layers. Quick context snapshot. In recent months, European nations have ramped up defense spending at levels unseen since the Cold War. From Germany pledging record military budgets, to Poland constructing one of the largest standing armies on the continent, to NATO's eastern flank being reinforced with new missile systems and troops. Europe is rearming and fast. Moscow sees this not as a defensive measure but as a direct threat for nation. Putin's latest statements are designed to frame European militarization as reckless, destabilizing, and possibly an existential danger to Russia. For nation, the Kremlin is painting a picture Europe, under NATO's umbrella and Washington's encouragement, is preparing for confrontation. The warning is clear, but what lies behind it and what happens next is far more complex. Explanation. The immediate event, the spark for this episode, was a televised address in which Putin warned European states that their rapid militarization will not go unanswered. Explanation. His words were delivered with the gravity of a leader who has tethered his political survival to the narrative of defiance. Putin stated that Russia is monitoring Europe's defense build-up closely. He pointed to the deployment of long-range missile systems near Russia's borders, the rise in joint NATO exercises, and even discussions within some European capitals about hosting permanent bases for advanced weaponry. For Moscow, explanation, this isn't just about numbers or hardware. It's about geography. Many of these deployments sit mere minutes away from Russian territory. In a crisis, explanation, warning times shrink to almost nothing, leaving Russia's security planners convinced that they are being boxed in. What makes this moment particularly explosive is timing. Russia remains locked in a grinding conflict in Ukraine. Sanctions continue to bite. Explanation. Yet Europe's resolve has hardened rather than weakened. From Moscow's perspective, the West has crossed every red line it once claimed it wouldn't. Weapons that were once too escalatory have not been delivered. Military aid packages have become routine, and Europe, once hesitant, is now more openly prepared for a long confrontation. Putin's threat must be read as both a warning and a test. A warning that Russia views Europe's military awakening as intolerable, and a test to see if Europe blinks or presses forward. Explanation, historical and political context. To understand why Putin's words resonate so strongly, we need to step back. Europe's militarization is not happening in a vacuum. It is the culmination of decades of shifting security doctrines, broken assumptions, and bitter historical memories. After the Cold War ended, many European states scaled down their militaries dramatically. Defense budgets shrank. Conscription ended in several countries. NATO remained, but its focus shifted toward peacekeeping and counterterrorism operations rather than preparing for full-scale war. For years, Russia protested NATO's eastward expansion, but Europe's governments largely treated Moscow's complaints as manageable noise. That calculus changed in 2014. When Russia annexed Crimea, European leaders suddenly rediscovered a threat they thought had been buried with the Soviet Union. Still, the response was measured. Sanctions were imposed. NATO bolstered its eastern flank slightly, but large-scale militarization was not yet on the table. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 obliterated those restraints. Germany announced a Zeitenwende, or historic turning point, pledging over $100 billion for defense. Poland declared it would build the most formidable land force in Europe. Finland and Sweden abandoned decades of military neutrality to join NATO. France, the UK, the Baltic states called for Europe to become self-reliant in defense production. From Russia's vantage point, this is not about deterrence, it is about encirclement. The Kremlin views NATO not as a defensive alliance but as an offensive machine, moving closer and closer to its borders. Historically, Russia has always feared invasion from the West, whether from Napoleon, the Kaiser, or Hitler. Explanation: this deep-seated memory is woven into Russian strategic thinking. To Putin and his security circle, Europe's militarization confirms their long-standing belief So the West will not accept Russia as it is and is preparing for direct confrontation. Politically, Putin thrives on framing himself as the defender of Russia against Western aggression. The stronger Europe arms itself, the easier it becomes for him to rally domestic support. He can point to tanks, missiles, and bases as proof that his warnings were justified all along. Explanation, and in authoritarian systems, threats from abroad are often used to silence dissent at home. This isn't just about weapons, it's about narrative. Explanation, global reactions. The world's response to Putin's threat has been fragmented, reflecting the tangled web of global alliances and interests. In Washington, the reaction was swift. U.S. officials framed Putin's comments as yet another example of Russian aggression, arguing that Europe's militarization is a rational response to Moscow's behavior. Statements from NATO headquarters echoed this explanation, insisting that the alliance's buildup is defensive in nature, meant to prevent war, not provoke it. Within Europe, reactions vary. Eastern European states such as Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia welcomed the warning as proof that their defense investments are necessary. For them, Putin's threat is validation. They believe Russia will only respect strength. Western European capitals, however, tread more cautiously. Berlin, Paris, and Rome balance the urgency of deterrence with fears of spiraling escalation. Germany, in particular, walks a fine line, haunted by its past but pressured by allies to assume a leadership role in European security. Outside of the West, the response has been more complicated. Explanation: China avoided direct criticism of Putin's statement, instead calling for dialogue while quietly benefiting from Russia's isolation through discounted energy deals. India urged restraint, wary of being pulled into a conflict that would jeopardize its balancing act between Moscow and Washington. Middle Eastern states, many of which rely on Russian arms and grain, reacted with studied neutrality. For them, this is another European drama with global economic consequences but limited local leverage. Meanwhile, in the global South, frustration grows. Leaders in Africa and Latin America argue that Western nations are pouring resources into militarization while global inequality, climate change, and debt crisis remain neglected. The world is listening, but not all are hearing the same message. Economic and strategic stakes. Europe's militarization is not just a political story. It is an economic revolution with global consequences. Defense budgets are swelling. Germany's massive rearmament plan has spurred a surge in domestic arms production. Poland is buying tanks, fighter jets, and missile systems at unprecedented rates, many of them from the US and South Korea. The UK and France are investing heavily in naval power and advanced technologies such as drones, cyber defense, and artificial intelligence. Explanation: this military buildup is reshaping Europe's economies, creating new industries, and redirecting funds once earmarked for social spending. For Russia, the economic stakes are equally high. Moscow already devotes a staggering portion of its GDP to defense, even under the weight of sanctions. The Kremlin knows it cannot compete with NATO's collective resources, but it can exploit vulnerabilities. Energy remains Russia's strongest lever. Its diversification efforts, Moscow still finds ways to pressure gas and oil markets. Grain exports, rare minerals, and energy partnerships with China and India give Russia partial insulation against Western pressure. Strategically, the stakes are immense. A militarized Europe tied tightly to NATO makes Russia's room for maneuver dangerously small. Any miscalculation, an aircraft straying too far, a missile system misread as offensive, a cyber attack gone wrong could trigger confrontation. Unlike in the Cold War when the line of contact was largely frozen, today's frontiers are fluid. Ukraine is a live battlefield. The Arctic is opening as a new theater. The Black Sea bristles with warships. And the Suwalki Gap, that narrow strip of land between Poland and Lithuania, looms as one of NATO's most vulnerable flashpoints. Economically and strategically, the message is stark. Both sides are investing in confrontation, whether they intend it or not. Possible futures: where does this path lead? 3 scenarios emerge. Scenario 1, de-escalation. In this more hopeful trajectory, Europe continues to militarize but also doubles down on dialogue. It strengthens its deterrence while keeping channels of communication open. Russia, under mounting economic pressure and war fatigue, signals willingness to freeze its confrontation in Ukraine. Limited arms control agreements, confidence-building measures, and crisis hotlines restore some stability. In this future, militarization remains, but it becomes a shield rather than a sword. Scenario 2, limited conflict. Here, Explanation: Europe's militarization and Russia's defiance collide in dangerous but contained ways. Skirmishes erupt along borders, cyber attacks, drone strikes, or sabotage of critical infrastructure. Both sides escalate but avoid full-scale war. Tensions remain high and Europe lives under constant threat, but direct confrontation is managed through back-channel diplomacy. This is the world of perpetual brinkmanship, exhausting and costly, but short of total war. Scenario 3: escalation. The darkest scenario is all-out confrontation. Europe's militarization, seen by Moscow as intolerable, triggers preemptive moves. Perhaps Russia deploys nuclear-capable missiles to Belarus or stages massive snap exercises near NATO borders. A miscalculation, an aircraft downed, spirals out of control. NATO responds, Russia doubles down. The conflict widens beyond Ukraine. In its first large-scale war since 1945, each of these futures is plausible. The difference lies in choices made now. Choices about restraint, communication, and political courage. Tension peak and big question. The tension is unmistakable. Europe, after decades of disarmament and complacency, is once again building armies. Russia, wounded but defiant, issues threats that carry the weight of history and nuclear power. Allies cheer, rivals calculate. Explanation: and ordinary citizens wonder how close the world is to a catastrophe. So here is the pressing question: is Europe's militarization the shield that will prevent war or the spark that ignites it? This story is still unfolding. Explanation: shaped by decisions made in capitals from Moscow to Berlin, from Washington to Warsaw. What happens next could determine the stability of Europe for generations. The threats are real, the stakes are immense, and the path ahead remains uncertain. But one truth endures: a nation understanding these dynamics is the first step to navigating them wisely. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe to Global Current Lens and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. Explanation, and let us know in the comments, do you believe Europe's militarization will ultimately deter Russia, or will it drag the continent into greater danger? Stay tuned and stay aware.